Welcome to TubeAmpRepairShop.com, the place to bring your tube amplifier to get serviced. We offer a free inspection of your amplifier to determine if it will need tubes or other service. You can find us on the web at TubeAmpRepairShop.com. You can call or text us at area code 818-645-1075. Today we have a JCM 900 dual reverb. This is from the combo in a cabinet that has two 12-inch speakers. We don't have the cabinet with us today, so we're just going to be taking a look at the head, which has been pulled out. We've installed new tubes and fuses. One of the tubes broke and blew both of the two HT fuses, high test. That's the high voltage. One for one pair of tubes and one for the other pair of tubes. They're 500 milliamp and they're in the very small size, 5 by 20 millimeters. Those have been replaced. So let's go ahead and take a look at our bias routine. We got everything we need in front of us. So let's get started. Now, to bias the amp, first thing we're going to do is turn down all of the knobs. Second thing we're going to do before we power it up is make sure that the selector switch is set to 8 ohms, and it is. So in this gray box over here, we have resistive loads. It's a box that I made from a Hammond case, and then I put in banana jacks. And what's inside of it are resistors. Got a 4 ohm resistor, an 8 ohm resistor, and a 16 ohm resistor. This is what you need to do when you're setting the bias. You need to make sure your amp, when you power it up, has a speaker load. So the resistors inside of here are 1000 watts. Even if you have a very, very large amplifier, this is a perfect tool for setting the speaker load. And I've got the banana jack plugged into the 8 ohm resistor. So we have an 8 ohm load. And then we're going to go ahead and plug a 1/4 inch cable where the speakers would go. Let's have a look at that. Now here are the speaker jacks, the ones that are in red. So they're black and red wire. Those are from the reverbs. In the cabinet, we won't be using those today. And then we're also going to need to plug in the power cable. So getting a power cable ready here. Unwinding it. All right. So we're going to put the power cable into the IEC connector, and we're going to plug it into our bench power. Got a strip up here above my work area. Okay, and that's got the approximately 170 volts, which is typical of a house wall outlet. Sometimes they go up to 122. All right. We have our resistive speaker load. We have our power. Everything is turned down, and the tubes are installed. Well, we're going to go ahead and put this upside down, and because the tubes are a little bit taller than the transformers, we're going to use some wooden blocks so that when it's upside down, sitting on the transformers, it won't press on the tubes. Keep them elevated. Okay, so there's one block. Here's the other block. Okay, and as you can see, there's a little bit of clearance under the tubes, so they're not being pressed on the table. Our speaker load is in. We're set to 8 ohms. We've got the power, and now we're going to identify the bias potentiometer. So Position this a little bit so we can see inside the camera. And this small blue potentiometer where I'm pointing is where we're going to set the bias. Okay, so we're going to take a quick look at my bias tool when I have the camera set up. This is a fabulous device. They're very hard to find, and the company that made them is no longer around, but it's the CompuBias, and if you see one in good condition, you'll probably want to have it. It displays on the screen, you'll be able to see it shortly, the plate voltage, the current being drawn, and the watts, all three. And there's two rows, one for two sets of tubes. So if you have two tube amp, like a lot of them are, you can get them both in there. On a 4-tube amp like this, we're going to select one tube from one side and one tube from the other. So I'm going to measure the two innermost tubes, and we'll see it active in a moment. Fit into this socket, which goes in between the tube and the chassis, and then this end, which is a small DIN connector with pins. It's like a little MIDI cable. Not quite sure if there's the exact name for it. This will plug into the device and turn it on. So because the socket is going to raise the tube up a little bit higher, even though I have the amp up on wood blocks, I'm going to have to put it up a little bit higher on a second set of wood blocks so that we can clear the tubes when this is inserted. Alright, since we'll be using these cables that go into the bias device, this is like a tube socket extension. We need to raise the amp up a little higher so these will fit in underneath and the tubes will still clear on the workbench. Adding to the height of my blocks with another block, putting under the transformer, which should be sufficiently stable for us to set the bias. They've located the bias inside the chassis. One thing I like about Fender amps is you can reach inside a lot of the time, and the screwdriver that adjusts the bias is available from both sides, so you don't have to take the whole amp apart. Of course, that's very nice when you can get it. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and take apart. We're going to go ahead and remove the two center tubes, taking off the spring cover. They're pretty tight, and that's a good thing. Removing the tube from the socket, and I can see that the pin is set over here at approximately 5 o'clock. So when I go to put them back in, I'll be able to rotate them since the amp is facing down. Okay, here is the first bias probe. We're going to get that locator pin also at 5 o'clock, so it'll go into the socket. Okay, that went in nicely. And we'll put the tube into it. Alright, now we're going to get the second receptacle for the bias tester into place. Get that locator pin adjusted at about 5 o'clock. And put it into the socket that's inside the amp. Okay, that's going in there. Now we get the tube into that. Make sure it's located. Always got to pay attention to these locator pins. You never want to put a tube in that has a broken locator pin, and you get the wrong voltages on there and cause all kinds of problems with the amp and the tube, just about everything. Okay, I'm going to insert these into my bias probe. There's a marking on here for the top. Okay, there's the first one, which is going to be on my left, even though it's upside down. Probably be the right side when I turn it right back up. Okay, so here the second one plugged in, and we'll show you what this looks like using the top camera. Guess we've got a pretty good picture of it. So you can get the lighting optimum so that you can see the display clearly. It's pretty good. Okay, so here on the left it's going to show the plate voltage, and then in the middle it's going to show the current, and then on the right it's going to show the watts. I'm going to go ahead and power up the unit. Turned on the first switch, the power switch, and that's going to apply the 6 volts to the heaters. We'll let the tubes warm up. In the book it says 14 seconds, but I found in the real world most people want to wait a little bit longer, 20 seconds, 30 seconds, a minute, so the tubes will warm up. And when you're doing your bias, you want your tubes to be warm anyways, get your most accurate reading. All of our knobs are turned down, we've got our speaker load, everything is good. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and turn on the high voltage. If everything's working right, yeah, we can see it in the center column. We can see the current has gone up, and that's showing the amount of current. So right now this amp is biased very cold. We look at the list on the right where it says EL34, it says 12 to 18, and right now our watts are at like 3 or 4. So reaching into the chassis, being careful because all the high voltage is in here and you never want to reach in with both hands. Just want to make sure that you guys can see the display. Okay, so as I turn the potentiometer, we can see it going, it's changing the amount of current being drawn. And now let's see, EL34 is 12 to 18. We're going to go close to 18. What I found to be general tool as you read about bias is that every tube manufacturer for each model specifies the maximum amount of dissipation that you can get. And typically if you set it to about 70% of the published specification of the maximum, that seems to be the sweet spot where they break up nicely and everything. We're pretty close to 18. So I'm going to stop there. It's between 17 and 18. The tubes are not exactly perfect. They're the same type of tubes. They're EL34s, but they weren't installed necessarily at the same time. It wasn't a match set when the client bought it. We probably have 4 tubes that were purchased at different times. And as you can see, they're pretty close. One is about 17.3 and one is about 17.8. For all intents and purposes, that's very, very close. And that's it. Now that we've set the bias, we can see it's 445 to 46 volts on the plate. The current being drawn is very close to 40. A lot of people say Marshalls are optimum at 38, but the true measure of bias is watts. So voltage times current equal watts, and we can see that the watts are at the recommended standard, 18 watts, which is shown in the list on the bias tool itself. So we're going to go with that. I'm going to go ahead and power down. There goes the standby. There goes the power switch. And I'm going to unhook the bias tool, put it away. We don't need any more. Shut off when I pull these little cables out. I'm going to remove the tubes. Be careful when you touch tubes. Sometimes they're hot. We didn't have it on for a very long time, so they're tolerable. A lot of times I'll reach for a glove. They're a little bit on the toasty side. If you have a glove, keep your fingers from getting burnt by the tubes when they're very hot. I'm pulling out the tube receptacle from the bias probe itself. Alright, we've got them out. And I'm going to wind them up. Got to take good care of these things since the company doesn't make them anymore. They're hard to get. I want this one to last as long as possible, hopefully forever. It's actually my favorite bias tool because right on the screen shows voltage, current, and watts all at the same time for 2 tubes. It's amazingly useful. I've used this to bias basically every amp for the last 8 years. That's my favorite way to do it. Of course, there are other ways, but that's my favorite. So, my tool, my screwdriver, keep all of these things together. Put that away for next time. Okay, so now I can unplug the power and our speaker load, just because it'll make it easier to flip the amp over, and then I'll put the tubes back in. You know, lift it up and get rid of my wooden blocks since we're not going to be upside down anymore. All right. Be careful of the reverb cables so nothing will happen to them. So, not all Marshalls have reverb, but of course the Marshall JCM 900 dual reverb has a separate reverb for each channel. It has a foot pedal so you can switch from clean to overdrive, which is great. Not all Marshalls have the ability to do the channel switching, especially the older ones. Some people think the 800 was better than the 900s, but I own several 900s myself. I have all 3 models, the SLX, the high gain, and the dual reverb, and all of them are fabulous. Well, it's nice to have the channel switching on this model. Alright, so now we'll pause for a moment and get hooked up to a speaker, and we'll get a chance to listen to the amp. Okay, so I've got the amp upside down because that's the way it naturally sits when it's in the combo. The knobs have the labels on top, and I've set the preamp gains and the master volume and the reverb for both channels. Even though there's a foot pedal, there's a switch here which turns red when it's in overdrive and it's clear when it's on the clean channel. The EQs are pretty much in the middle, and we'll give this thing a listen. So here's the clean channel. Clean channel sounds nice, so try adding more bass. Alright, let's hear the overdrive crunch channel. That's what Marshalls are all about. Well, Telecaster, this one has a humbucker in it. Through the Marshall JCM 900, 100 watt, high gain, dual reverb. We've successfully biased it. We got a test here with the speakers, and you know what? Sounds pretty fabulous. If you need to bias your amp, you need to put in new tubes, and then bias your amp, bring it here to Tube Amp Repair Shop. We'll get it done right. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you soon. This video has been brought to you by TubeAmpRepairShop.com, the place to bring your tube amplifier to get serviced. We offer a free inspection of your amplifier to determine if it needs tubes or other service, and set bias as needed. You can Find us on the web at tubeamprepairshop.com, and you can call or text us at area code 818-645-1075. And we'll be happy to help you with all of your tube amp service and repair needs.